I came up the Sarn Valley Road in the back of a supply truck in the last week of summer, 19 years old, with a duffel I didn't know how to pack, and a rifle I'd fired 40 times in my life. And the first thing anyone ever told me about combat Outpost Lear was a joke. The driver was a corporal named Ibar who'd done 2 tours and talked the whole climb to keep himself awake, and I was glad of it, because the road frightened me and his voice was something to hold on to. It was a bad road. It ran straight up the floor of the valley for 11 miles, gravel crushed to powder by years of tracks, hemmed in on both sides by ground that rose into rock and scrub and then into the blue haze of the high ridges, and there was exactly one of it. One road in, one road out. Ibar told me that early, the way you tell a new man the thing that matters most while pretending it's small talk. One road, he said. Remember that. Everything that comes up this valley, friend or otherwise, comes up this road because there isn't another one. You'll dream about this road. He pointed things out as we climbed. The wire far up ahead, a thin bright scratch across the throat of the valley. The watchtowers at the corners. The burned hull of a fuel Bowser sitting off the road at a bend, blackened and split open, that he said had been hit the spring before and that nobody had bothered to drag away. And then, as we came in through the south gate and the outpost opened up around us, HESCO walls and canvas and connects boxes, and the smell of diesel and dust and men. He pointed at the south end of the wire, where a sprawl of vehicles sat under camouflage net, half of them up on blocks, and he grinned at me sideways. "You'll probably get stuck down there your first week," he said. "Motor pool with the grease monkey." "The what?" "You'll see." He laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd said all morning, a real laugh, easy, with nothing mean in it that he could feel. "Just do yourself a favor. Don't let her talk you into helping with that tank. It's never going to run, and she's never going to stop pretending it will, and you'll spend your whole tour holding a flashlight for a dead engine if you're not careful." I didn't ask him anything else. I was 19 and frightened of saying the wrong thing in front of a man with 2 tours, and I'd already learned the single safest move a new soldier has, which is to laugh when the old soldiers laugh. So I laughed. I didn't even know what I was laughing at. I just knew the shape of the moment wanted a laugh from me, and I gave it one, easy, the way you hand over a cigarette. I have thought about that laugh for 30 years. I have thought about how little it cost me and how much it was worth, and how a thing can be both of those at once. They put me in the motor pool my first week, exactly the way Ibar said they would. The platoon sergeant, a square, tired man named Oduya, looked at my file for about 10 seconds, saw that I'd spent 2 summers working in my uncle's diesel shop back home before I enlisted, and decided on the spot that this made me a mechanic. It did not make me a mechanic. It made me a kid who could change a fuel filter and tell a good belt from a bad one. But the Army runs on 10-second decisions made by tired men. And so, at 6 o'clock the next morning, I reported to the south end of the wire with my sleeves already rolled, and that was where I met her. She was kneeling in the dirt under the front slope of the dead tank with a bore light in one hand, and she did not look up when I said my name. The tank loomed over her, low and broad and enormous, 70 tons of dirty steel under a sagging net, and she was so small underneath it, and so still that for a moment I thought she might be praying. She wasn't. She was looking up into the dark of the bore from below with the patience of someone reading. "Holloway," she said at last, not a question, filing it. "You the diesel kid?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am." She set the bore light down in the dirt and looked at me for the first time, and I'll tell you what I saw, because I spent a year revising it. I saw a woman of maybe 35, though the sun and the work had been over her face enough times that you couldn't have sworn to it. A plain face, weathered down to something steady, dark hair pulled back tight and going gray at the temples. She wore coveralls with the sleeves cut clean off at the shoulder, and no rank that I could find anywhere on her. Not on her collar, not on her chest, nowhere. Her forearms were corded with muscle and laced with old white scars, and stained black to the elbow with grease that I would come to understand no soap on earth was ever going to fully lift. And her eyes were a flat, patient gray, and there was nothing soft in them. And this is the part the men never saw, nothing cruel in them either. They were just level. They looked at you and took your measure and didn't tell you what they'd found. "Vance," she said. "You can call me Vance. Grab that light and get under here. I want to show you what a tired return spring sounds like before I want to hear you talk." I got under there. That was the first morning of the rest of my life, though I didn't know it, and we hardly spoke. She had me hold the light where she wanted it and pass tools by name and learn the names I didn't know. And she ran her hands over the underside of that machine, the way I'd seen our doctor back home run his hands along my grandfather's ribs, listening through her fingers, finding the places where the thing was hurting and the places where it was only old. By noon, lying in the dirt with grease in my own hair, I understood two things about combat outpost Lear, and one of them was wrong. The first thing, the right one, was that the work was real. Whatever else they said about her up at the billets, the woman could fix anything with an engine in it, and the outpost vehicles ran because of her. The gun trucks the crews loved so much, the light armored rigs they spun around the wire and took out on patrol, those ran because Vance got up before everyone and bled the air out of their lines and chased down the rattles nobody else could find. That much even her loudest doubters would have granted, if you'd cornered them honest. The second thing, the wrong one, the one I caught from the others before I knew better, was that the tank was a joke. Old Bull, somebody had stenciled on the barrel years before, in white paint faded now to a ghost. It was the only one of its kind on the outpost, a real battle tank where everything else was wheels, and the men said it was a tomb on tracks. It had been hit twice in its service life, somewhere before any of us, and it limped a track that wanted constant tension, an engine that ran rough and hot, a turret traverse that had to be coaxed. The crews said the smart thing, the only thing, was to strip it for the parts that would keep the trucks running and let the hull rust in peace. And the grease monkey, they said, this was the joke, this was the whole joke. The grease monkey wouldn't let them. She bobbied a dead tank. She ran its engine and cleaned its gun and aimed it, with great care, at a valley where nothing ever came. And that was the saddest and the funniest thing on the outpost, depending on the man telling it. I caught the joke the way you catch a cold in a crowded room. I didn't decide to believe it. It was just in the air and I breathed it, and for a while it lived in me. But I worked beside her every day, and a thing happens when you work beside someone every day, which is that the joke stops fitting. It hangs on them looser and looser until one morning it falls off entirely and you see the person underneath, and you can't get the joke back on no matter how you try. Here is what I saw over those first weeks that started to loosen it. Every morning before the light was full, Vance ran the tank's engine. Not idling, she ran it through its range, up and down, listening, until it was what she called honest. An engine lies when it's cold, she told me once. It'll run smooth for you when there's no load on it and then quit the second you ask it for something. You run it till it's warm and you run it under load and you listen, and when it stops lying to you, that's when you know what you've got. She did this every single morning, for a tank the whole outpost had buried. Every afternoon she went over the gun. This was the part that made the men shake their heads hardest, because it was so patient and so pointless to them. She bore-sighted it, lined the barrel dead true to the optics, so that the place the gunner looked through the sight was exactly, to the inch, the place the round would go a mile away. It is finicky, unglamorous, knuckle-skinning work, and there is no audience for it and no glory in it, and she did it every few days as faithfully as a man says his prayers. Why keep it true? I asked her, maybe my third week, if it's never going to shoot. Even the gun trucks don't fuss this much. She was sighting down the barrel and she did not move her eye from it. The gun trucks fire all the time, she said. They learn their lies and they correct for them on the fly, a little high here, a little left there, because they get to practice. This one doesn't get to practice. This one gets to be perfect or it gets to be useless. She made a small adjustment, a quarter turn of something gentle. The day you need a gun is not the day to find out it lies to you, Holloway. By then it's too late to learn its lies, so you don't let it have any. I wrote that down later, in a letter home I started and never finished. I have it memorized still. The day you need a gun is not the day to find out it lies to you. I was 19 and I thought it was just a thing mechanics say, the kind of weathered line old hands hand to young ones. I know now it was the truest sentence anyone spoke to me in that valley, and that she had bought it somewhere I could not yet imagine, with money I did not yet have. And every evening, this was the strangest thing, the thing that finally pulled the joke all the way off. Every evening while the crews ate and played cards and told their stories in the long blue dusk, Vance sat on the front slope of Old Bull with a clipboard and a pair of field glasses, and she studied the valley, and she wrote things down. I asked her about it, the way I asked her about everything, because she was the only person on that outpost who answered a green kid's questions without making him pay for them in scorn. "What are you writing?" "Range card." She didn't stop, the pencil moved. "For what?" "For everything." She lowered the glasses and lifted her chin at the valley laid out below us, going gold and then gray as the sun left it, the road, the river beside it, the broken ground, the far ridge blue with distance. See the burned Bowser by the bend, 1,100 meters from this slope. The big rock down there that looks like a closed fist, where the patrols turn around 1,600. The mouth of the side wadi, where the goat trail comes down off the high ground, 2,200. And listen, this matters. The wind funnels through that wadi mouth in the early morning, left to right, about half a value, every clear day like clockwork, because of how the cold air drains off the high ground at dawn. She wrote another line in her small square hand. "There's a culvert under the road at about the 800 mark. You can't see it from up here, but I've walked it. The road next down there narrow with the drop on one side. Anything heavy that wants to come up this valley has to slow down right there to get across it. Has to. There's no other way." I looked at the valley and I saw a valley, a pretty, empty, dangerous valley going dark. She looked at the same valley and she saw a clock, with every hour marked and numbered, and she had been winding it every evening for a year. "Nobody asked you to do this," I said. I didn't mean it cruel. I was 19 and I genuinely did not understand why a person would do hard, careful, daily work that no one had ordered and no one would ever thank them for. She wrote one more line before she answered. "No," she said, "nobody did." And then, after a moment, not bitter, just plain, "That's usually how it is with the things that turn out to matter. Nobody asks. You do them anyway, or you don't, and you find out which kind of person you are on a morning you didn't get to pick." She capped the pencil and looked at me, and there was something in her face then that I was too young to read and have spent a long time since learning to. It wasn't sad, exactly. It was more like the patience of someone who has already lived through the morning she's describing, once, a long time ago, and knows it comes for everyone eventually, and has simply decided to be ready when it comes for her again. I want to be fair to the men, because I've had 30 years to be unfair to them, and it hasn't helped anything. Most of them were not bad men. They were tired, and they were frightened in the particular grinding way you get frightened when you have been in one dangerous place too long and nothing has happened for a while, and you've started to half believe nothing ever will, which is the most dangerous belief there is. And tired, frightened men do a certain thing to keep the world small enough to manage. They decide some matters are settled, filed, done, not to be reopened. Vance was one of their settled matters. She transferred in the year before I arrived, from somewhere nobody could name, with a thin file and no stories attached to her, and she had asked once, quietly, the way I'd learned she asked for everything to be put on a gun crew. The man who answered her was Sergeant Pell. I should tell you about Pell honestly, because the easy version isn't true, and the easy version is an insult to what really happened. Pell was not a villain. Pell ran the senior gun truck and he ran it well, and he knew the valley and he kept his men alive and they loved him for it. And on most days he was the kind of sergeant a green private hopes he gets. But he was also a man who decided what the world was, and a woman in cut-off coveralls asking to crew a gun did not fit the world he decided on. And rather than do the hard work of reopening a settled matter, he reached for the cheap thing. The thing always lying right there within reach for a man who wants a laugh and an exit at the same time. He looked her up and down. I have this from 3 different men who were there, and they all tell it the same, which is how you know it's true. And he said, "We've got crews. What we don't have is anybody to keep these trucks running. You want to be useful, you can be useful down at the motor pool." And then, because men were listening, and because a laugh is the cheapest coin there is and Pell had it in his pocket, he added, "Don't worry, Grease Monkey, we'll let you watch." Said, "All right, that's all. All right." And she picked up her tools and went down to the south end of the wire, and the name stuck the way names stick, not because it was clever but because it was easy, and easy is what travels. By the time I came up the valley a year later, it wasn't even an insult anymore, not really, not in anyone's mouth. It had worn smooth from use into something almost affectionate, the way a cruelty does once everyone's forgotten it was ever a cruelty. The Grease Monkey. The motor pool girl, the one who bobbies the dead tank. Nobody hated her. Hate would have required them to keep seeing her, and they had stopped. That's the thing I understand now that I couldn't have said then. There is a particular way men quit seeing a person. They look right at her, their eyes land on her and move on. And what they actually see is the idea of her they filed away a year ago. And the living person standing there in front of them could do almost anything at all, and they would find a way to fold it back into the old idea without ever once having to look again. I almost did it too. I want to set this down plainly because if I tell you the story without it, I'm making myself better than I was, and the whole point of Vance is that she never once did that for herself. There was an evening in my 4th or 5th week. Pell's crew was sitting outside the chow tent in the dusk, and somebody, a young trigger puller named Driggs, not much older than me, eager and loud the way I was eager and quiet, started doing an impression of Vance. He hunched himself over an imaginary clipboard and squinted out at nothing and droned in a flat, dead voice. 1,100 meters, 1,600 meters, half a value, every clear day like clockwork. And he got the cadence of her exactly, the patience of it, and turned the patience into stupidity, and the whole circle of men laughed. And I felt the laugh come up in my own chest, warm and easy and automatic, the very same laugh I'd handed Ibar in the supply truck on my first morning, and I let it out. I laughed at her. She was maybe 40 feet away at the wash station, scrubbing the day's grease off those forearms in the last light. I don't know if she heard. She didn't turn around. She never turned around for any of it, not once in the whole year, which I took at the time for not caring and understand now was something much harder and much better than not caring. But I knew I'd done it. And not 2 weeks after that evening, I would owe that woman every single thing I had, beginning with the rest of my life. And I had spent one of my last easy nights on earth laughing at her in the dark with the men who couldn't see her. I have carried that small laugh next to the big one from the supply truck for 30 years, and I have needed both of them, because together they are the whole education. They are how I know exactly how cheap it is to stop seeing someone, and exactly what it can cost. The thing turned on a Tuesday, an hour before first light, in the gray dead time when the watch is tiredest, and the whole valley is the color of cold ash. I was asleep in the motor pool. I'd taken to sleeping down there those last weeks, partly because it was quieter than the main billets and partly, I'll be honest, I've earned the right to be honest, because I had started to want to be near her. Not in any way a young man's foolishness would have made of it. It was that she was the one sure thing in a place that frightened me, the one person who knew exactly what she was about, and being near her steadied me the way a hand on a rail steadies you on a pitching deck. So I was asleep, on a cot 20 feet from Old Bull when it started. The first thing I knew was the explosion. The explosion came a half-second later, a single enormous flat crack from the north wire that I felt in my teeth and my breastbone before I heard it. The first thing, underneath that before it, was a sound I had never heard in my life and had no name for. A deep grinding mechanical rumble coming up the valley road out of the dark. Many engines, big ones, heavy, the sound of a great deal of armored weight moving fast over gravel. By the time my mind found a name for the sound, the world had already come apart. I'm not going to pretend I remember the next while in order. Nobody who lived through it remembers it in order, and the men who claim they do are arranging it after the fact into something they can stand to carry. What I have are pieces, very bright, out of sequence. The siren starting late, somebody up on a tower finally awake and hauling on it, the sound climbing and falling. Machine gun fire from the north, ours first, the familiar bark of our guns, and then under it and around it, a heavier, deeper hammering that wasn't ours. One of the gun truck's Pells, I learned later, with Pell himself spilling out of it, trying to wheel out toward the road to meet the thing coming, and taking a hit square that lifted its whole front end clear off the ground and set it back down dead and burning, all of it inside the time it takes to draw one breath. Men running, men yelling, a man down somewhere near the chow tent screaming a single name over and over into the dark, a name I didn't know, with a sound in it I'd never heard a grown man make. And over and under all of it, that grinding rumble, getting louder, getting closer, coming up the one road exactly the way she had always said a thing would have to, up the single road, through the choke points, toward the south wire and the soft underbelly of the outpost, toward the motor pool, toward me. Toward the place where the only thing standing between an armored column and the rest of the sleeping men of combat outpost Lear was a stretch of HESCO wall, and a tank that everyone but one person on Earth had given up for dead. I was on the ground with my hands laced over the back of my head. I am not ashamed of that now, though I was for a long time, more years than it deserved. I was 19, and it was the loudest and most violent thing that had ever happened to me by a margin I cannot describe, and my body simply would not obey me. I could not make my legs work. I could not make my hands come off my head. I lay in the dirt by my cot and shook and could not move, and I want you to understand that, because what came next did not come from me. It came from her. A hand closed on the back of my collar and hauled me up off the ground, and it was strong the way a come-along winch is strong. No jerk, no panic in it, just a steady, irresistible lifting force. And then Vance's flat gray eyes were 6 inches from mine, and her voice came in clean and level underneath all the noise in the world, not raised, not hurried, somehow cutting through everything precisely because it wasn't. Holloway with me now. And then she did the thing I will remember when I've forgotten my own name. She did not run. The whole world was running. Men were sprinting and diving and screaming, and the dark was full of fire, and Vance turned and walked fast, faster than I'd ever seen her move, but a walk, both feet always under her, no scramble in it, straight across the motor pool to Old Bull. She went up the side of it the way she'd gone up it 100 mornings while the rest of us slept, easy, certain, every handhold already known to her, and she dropped down through the hatch, and then she looked back out and down at me standing there in the dirt with my rifle in my hands, useless, shaking, 19 years old. You ever load a gun this size? Enzo. You're about to. Loader station, left of the breach, I'll talk you through every round. You do exactly what I tell you, exactly when I tell you, and you do not stop, no matter what you hear. Can you do that? I don't. You can, get in, come on, son. And then softer just for me under the noise, we don't have the morning. I climbed into that tank because she told me to. I have to be precise about this, because it's the truest thing I know about courage, and most of what people say about courage is wrong. I did not climb in because I was brave. I had no bravery anywhere in me. I'd just proven that, lying in the dirt with my hands on my head. I climbed in because her voice had something in it that my body obeyed before my mind could get a vote in, a certainty, an absolute lack of doubt that worked on me like gravity. She wasn't afraid, or if she was, she had it so far under that it made no difference to anything she did, and being near that, climbing down inside that, I borrowed enough of it to move. That's what she gave me first before she gave me anything else. She gave me the use of my own legs back. Inside it was a black iron cave that stank of oil and cordite and old smoke, cramped and hard-edged, and I barely had myself folded into the loader's station when the engine she had kept honest every single morning turned over on the first try, and the whole 70-ton hull came alive and trembling around me. Panel lights came up, green and amber, throwing her face into hard, underlit relief. And then she did the thing the men would never have believed if they hadn't been about to owe their lives to it. She dropped not into the commander's seat but into the gunner's, down behind the optics, and her hands found the controls in the dark and the cramp without her ever once looking down at them. Found them the way my own hands find the light switch in my own hallway at home on a night with no moon, without thought, without sight, from 1,000 repetitions worn into the body below the level of the mind. And she put her eye to the sight, and the turret began to turn. Slow, certain, like the minute hand of a clock. Round, she said. The long ones, the ones I had you stack on the left, the sabot. Up and into the breech, push it till you feel it click home, then slap my shoulder and say up. Say it loud. Go. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the first one. The round was heavy and slick and longer than my whole arm, and I got it up against my chest and lined it on the open breech and shoved it in, and it slid home with a sound like the door of a vault swinging shut, and the breech rolled closed on its own after it, and I slapped her shoulder, and I shouted up in a voice that did not sound like any voice I'd ever made. Good, she said, just that, not loud, not hurried. 800, the culvert, the neck in the road. The first one's always at the neck because they always have to slow there every time they can't help it. Watch the road. She had told me, weeks before on the slope in the gold and then the gray with the clipboard on her knee. There's a culvert under the road at about the 800 mark. The road next down there. Anything heavy has to slow down right there. I had not understood, sitting on that slope, that I was being shown the future. I'd thought it was just a mechanic's strange hobby, a way to fill the evenings. But she had walked that ground and measured that road and written the number down and carried it in her sleep cold for a year. And now she laid the true gun, the gun she had refused to let lie to her, onto the exact patch of road where she had decided, a year before any of this, that the killing would have to start. And she said one word. Firing. I have heard that gun many times in the years since. On ranges, in exercises, in 2 more wars before they let me go home for good. I have never once heard it the way I heard it that first time in the dark, inside the iron with her hand steady on the trigger, and the whole great machine rearing back against the recoil like a struck animal. The world went white. The overpressure slammed my chest like a flat hand. My ears quit entirely, replaced by a high thin ringing that was almost peace. And through the haze and the sight, she let me put my eye to it once, just once between rounds. I think because she knew a man needs to see a thing to believe he lived it. I saw the lead vehicle of that column come apart at the neck of the road, at the 800 mark, precisely where she'd said a column would have to slow, and it slewed hard sideways and stopped dead and burned, and it corked the narrow road behind it the way a stone corks the neck of a bottle. And that in the end was the whole of it. That was her plan, drawn up a year before anyone needed it, written in a small square hand on a clipboard nobody else ever read. The valley was one road and one road only, and one road is a string of choke points, and she knew the range to every choke point on it cold, in her sleep, and she had kept one gun perfectly true for the one morning a gun would be needed. And now she sat in the dark inside the dead tank and took that column apart at its choke points one vehicle at a time, while behind their burning leader the rest of them fought and ground and could not get past their own dead. Because the road was the only road, and she owned every single meter of it. Round. I loaded. My hands were steadier already. I didn't notice it happening. I only noticed, somewhere in there, that they had stopped shaking. 1600, the fist rock. One's trying to flank wide around the wreck off the road into the broken ground. He thinks that's clever. He's going to have to come past the rock to do it. A pause, the turret tracking, slow, certain, the optics finding the place she had named a year ago. Firing. White, the flat hand on the chest, the ringing. Round. I loaded. 2,200, the waddy mouth. Winds left to right this hour, half a value, I've got it built in. There's one sitting back in there in the dark thinking he's out of it, thinking nobody can reach that far, that he'll wait and come up clean once we're spent. The turret crept, slow, certain. He's wrong about how far I can reach. Firing. She had told me that one too. On the slope in the dusk, while Driggs did his impression and the men laughed and I, God help me, laughed with them. The wind funnels through that waddy mouth in the early morning, left to right about half a value every clear day like clockwork. She had measured the wind. She had measured the dawn wind in a place men only ever passed through, a year before the morning came, and written it down. And now the morning had come exactly as she'd known a morning eventually would. And the wind was doing precisely what she'd recorded it doing, draining cold off the high ground left to right at half a value. And she reached out across 2,200 meters of bad gray light and broken ground and a crosswind, and she put a single round into a vehicle that believed itself safe. Because she had already done that arithmetic in a season nobody else remembered, on an evening everyone else had spent laughing. It went on. I genuinely do not know for how long. Inside the tank there is no time, there is only the next round and the next number, and her voice saying firing, steady, level, never once rising. I want that on the record because it's the center of everything. She never once raised her voice. Not in triumph, not in fear, not in strain. The same flat, patient tone she'd used to teach me the sound of a tired return spring. She now used to take a column apart in the dark. 800. 1,600. 2,200, firing. Round, good. My hands learned their work somewhere in there. I didn't decide to be brave. I simply ran out of room to be afraid with her so calm beside me, and after a while I was loading clean and fast and slapping her shoulder and shouting up like I'd been born to it. And each time she said good, once just that. And I am telling you that single quiet word was the best thing anyone had ever given me in my life to that point. And I lived a long time and a full one, and it is still near the top of the list. 9. We counted them after in the first real light, the wrecks strung up that road at her choke points like dark beads on a gray string, at the neck of the culvert, at the fist rock at the mouth of the wadi, and back down the line where the rest had died grinding against their own dead, trying and failing to get past the cork she'd put in the bottle. 9 armored vehicles. 1 gun. One woman who had been told for 2 years that what the outpost needed from her was to keep the trucks running, and when there was real work to be done, to stand back and watch. The relief column came up the valley road just after first light, when it was over, when the gun had gone quiet and the engine was ticking as it cooled, and the breech sat open and empty, and a hard pink sun was coming up over the eastern ridge into a sky scrubbed clean. They came up that same one road, the only road, threading slow and careful between the wrecks she'd made, and they stopped short of the south wire, and a tall older man swung down out of the lead vehicle and stood for a long moment just looking. He looked at the burned column strung up the road behind him. He looked at the battered outpost. And then he looked at the one dead tank that had turned out not to be dead at all, sitting low and broad and ugly under its torn net with its long barrel still ticking with heat. He was the command sergeant major, Salas. I didn't know the name when he climbed down. I learned it that morning along with everything else worth knowing. He'd come up with the relief, and he had been a soldier longer than I had been alive, and the men of our outpost, what was left of us, the ones who could still stand, were pulling ourselves together in the gray, dazed, soot-blacked, ears ringing, and forming up the way soldiers form up when they don't know what else to do with their hands and their grief. Pell was among them, upright, with a field dressing wrapped around his head and dried blood down one side of his face, and the burned ruin of his gun truck still smoking behind him. Vance climbed down off the tank. She was black to the elbows, worse than I had ever seen her, soot over the old grease, and there was a cut over her eyebrow she hadn't noticed and didn't notice for a long time yet, a thin line of dried blood down her cheek. And she walked fast, unhurried, both feet always under her, The way she always walked straight toward the command sergeant major to make her report. The way the lowest soldier on a post walks up to the highest to tell him what happened. Because that, in her own mind after everything, was still exactly what she believed she was. The lowest. The grease monkey reporting. Salas saw her coming and he stopped. I was close. I had come down out of the tank behind her on legs that still didn't entirely belong to me, and I was standing maybe 10 feet off. So I saw his face do the thing it did, and I have watched a great many faces in 30 years since, and I have never seen another one do it. He looked at her plain, weathered face, and her grease and soot-black arms, and her cut-off coveralls with no rank anywhere on them. And for one full second, he was simply a tired old soldier looking at a motor pool mechanic who'd had a long night. And then something moved. Far back behind his eyes, some old, heavy door swinging open on a hinge that hadn't turned in years, and the color went straight out of his face. I know you, he said, quietly. It carried anyway because the whole gray morning had gone still around us. I'd know you in the dark. I did know you in the dark once. Vane Pass. Vance didn't say anything. Her jaw set just slightly, a small tightening at the corner. That was all. That was the only thing in her whole bearing that moved. Vane Pass, Salas said again, and this time he said it loud to the men, to all of us, turning his head to take in the whole formed-up, soot-blacked, broken remainder of combat outpost Lear, his rough voice climbing up out of his chest. Some of you have heard the story. The gun that held Vane Pass. 8 years back, a column like this one, worse than this one, came up a road like this one at a position that should have folded in 10 minutes flat. And it did not fold. It did not fold because one gunner stayed up on that gun alone, after the rest of the crew was gone, and held the only road for 2 hours until relief could fight its way through. We told that story for years, all up and down this command. And here's the thing. His voice caught and he let it. We never had a name. Command kept it close, and the gunner wanted it kept close, wanted no part of the telling, and so the rest of us, we just called it the gun at Vane Pass. Like it was the gun that did it, like there wasn't a person inside it the whole time. He took a breath that shook in him. The call sign was Keystone. You men know what a keystone is. It's the one stone at the top of the arch. The one that holds every other stone up. And you don't see it. You walk under it your whole life and you never once look up at it until somebody tries to pull it out and the whole arch comes down on their heads. He looked at Vance. The whole outpost looked at Vance. Pell looked at Vance, with his bandaged head and the blood dried down his face, and I watched the thing happen behind his eyes too, the same heavy door swinging open. And I watched 2 years of grease monkey and motor pool girl, and will let you watch fall away from him all at once and leave him standing on nothing at all. It was you, Salas said. The whole time. It was you up that road at Vane Pass, and they had you down here running trucks. He said it like it caused him physical pain, and I believe it did. They had Keystone running their trucks and telling her to stand back and watch. And then the command sergeant major of that whole valley, a man who had been a soldier for 30 hard years and had earned the right to make any man on that ground stand for him, came to attention himself in front of the grease monkey. His boots came together. His spine went straight, and he brought his right hand up slow, and he held the salute, and he held it, and he did not drop it. I'll tell you what the men did, because that is the part that matters most, and it's the part I have never once been able to tell without my voice going somewhere I can't follow it. They followed him. Pell first, Pell, who had coined the name 2 years before, who had handed her the joke and the exit in the same breath. Pell came to attention with his bandaged head and his bloodied face, and brought his hand up in a salute that trembled the whole way, and his face was wet, and he did not wipe it, and he did not look away from her. Then Driggs, who had hunched over the imaginary clipboard and droned like clockwork and made me laugh, Driggs came to attention and saluted, that loud eager boy gone silent. And then the rest of them, one after another down the broken line, the soot-blacked survivors of combat outpost Lear, coming to attention in the hard pink light, and holding the salute for the woman not one of them had truly looked at in over a year. And me, I came up last, 19 years old, still half deaf, with her oil black on my own two hands. I came to attention and I held it, and I have never in my life meant anything more. Vance stood and took it. She did not smile. She did not draw herself up proud, did not say one word about the year or the 2 years, did not so much as glance at Pell to make him feel the weight of it, did not gloat. There was no gloat anywhere in the woman. There never had been, not one grain of it. She just stood there, plain and weathered and worn down past the end of herself, the cut over her eye finally beginning to sting, and she let them hold the salute. And then she did the thing I think about most of all. More than the gun, more than the 9 wrecks, more than any of it. She turned away from us. She turned her back on the whole of it, the salute, the name spoken aloud at last, the men finally seeing her. All the things she'd been denied for 2 years now poured out in front of her at once. She turned her back on all of it and she faced the other way. She faced the burned column strung up the road, the 9 wrecks smoking at her choke points, and beyond them, out and down the valley, toward the men who had not come back. Hours. The gun truck crews caught in the first dark minute before any of it, before she ever reached the tank. And she brought her own hand up and she held the salute not to us, never once to us, out toward the road and the dead. Her chin came up. The cut over her eye was bleeding again and she did not notice. And she held it there, facing away from every man who had finally learned her name, until Salas, very gently in a voice I had to strain to hear, said, "All right, Sergeant." All right now, and only then, slow, did she bring her hand down. Salas formed us up before the relief moved on. What was left of us, drawn together at the motor pool, at the tank, at Old Bull with its ghost-white faded name. And he put his broad hand flat on the warm steel of the hull, and he said that as of that morning the gun was hers, and the section was hers, and that any man on that post who had a problem with the grease monkey running the heaviest weapon combat outpost Lear possessed could come and explain that problem to him, personally, right now, where he stood. No man had a problem. He gave her the gun in front of all of us, handed it back to her, really, the way you return a thing to its rightful owner that should never have been taken in the first place. And then he turned and looked us over once more, the survivors, the young and the soot-black and the ringing-eared, and he said one more thing, and I have kept it the exact way Vance kept her ranges, cold, exact, in my sleep, for 30 years. "You had a keystone," he said, "and you spent 2 years trying to pull it out because you couldn't see what it was holding up, couldn't be bothered to look up. You are alive this morning. Every one of you breathing in this formation is alive this morning because she held the arch anyway, held it for people who never once looked up at her. He let that sit on us. Then don't you ever again, any of you, as long as you wear this uniform, decide you know what a soldier is by looking at where somebody stuck them. You hear me? You look twice. You look until you see." I served 22 more years after that valley. I made my own rank, in time more of it than that frightened 19-year-old in the supply truck would ever have dared dream. And I led men and women of my own in good places and in terrible ones. And on the first morning that any new soldier reported to me, every time for 22 years, I made myself do the thing Salas said, and the thing Vance taught me without ever once saying a word about it. I made myself look at them twice. Once for what I thought they were, the quick, easy read, the 10-second decision a tired man makes. And then once more, slower, deliberate, against my own tiredness, for what they might be holding up that I could not yet see. I learned that from a woman they called the grease monkey, a woman who kept a dead tank honest every morning for a year, and a gun perfectly true, for a morning she somehow always knew was coming, who, when that morning came, did not run, walked, both feet under her, to the gun, who held the breach of that whole valley alone in the dark off-range cards she'd built on the evenings the men spent laughing at her, and who, when it was over and they finally rose and saluted and spoke her name, turned her back on every one of them so that she could salute, instead, the ones who would never rise again. They called her Keystone. I called her Vance. I was 19 years old, and on the worst and best morning of my life she let me load her gun, and I have spent every year since trying to be worth the single word she gave me each time I did it right. Good, she'd say, quiet level just the once. It was the best thing I was ever given, and I have been given a great deal.